All right, about to go now.
How are you doing?
Oh. Hi there, Bruno. Sorry, fine, thanks, and you?
I'm good. I'm good. Did you get a good rest? Are you ready to hit this the ground running?
Well, unfortunately, no rest for me. I spent my December working. I'll luckily get a rest in about a month's time, where I sneak off to go get some cooler weather and get away from this heat that we're experiencing in Joburg.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, no, fair enough. So yeah, so what's that next month?
Yes, next month I'm out of here. So I'll have to substitute myself for someone else for the PLA for some
No,
time. How about you? How was your December?
You can bring Solna back. No, yeah, mine was good.
Yeah, good. Yeah, no, I'll tell Solna she has to come back. Perfect. Well, Bruno, we got two questions today. So I'm going to give the first one to you.
Sure.
This question, unfortunately, we don't have a name for it, but it was placed on our YouTube. And basically what they say is they have a cooperative housing society with limited liability and a tenant co-partnership that has 47 members and owns a plot, which is about 1,500 meters squared in extent. They have a elected management committee and a registrar as well. And what's happening there is the owner of the plot that neighbors their society basically wants them to sign a consent to a servitude of a certain meterage over the plot that they own, in exchange for a redeveloper co-owner of the neighboring plot to give them more area than what another builder can give. So the questions are: does giving signed consent to a servitude imply a dilution of the plot ownership rights of the society members? Okay. Then they're asking, is the consent of each of their 47 members required for the registration of the servitudal deed? And does the servitudal deed need to be registered against the title deeds of the property?
Sure.
And there's another question. Very lastly, what can be done by the members of the society to oppose the servitude deed to ensure that their co-ownership rights are not diluted by the servitude deed?
Okay, cool. So maybe keep track to see if I do actually.
I promise I'll help you out. We'll go through the questions. So to repeat the first one, does giving signed consent of the servitude imply a dilution of the plot ownership rights of the society members?
So I'm going to make your life difficult, and I'm going to like answer it in a very weird circular way, right? Yeah. Well, to begin with, so most people understand. So a cooperative, if we draw an analogy to our corporate structuring in South Africa, cooperative, very similar to a company in its legal nature. So it's just something we need to remember. So we speak of societies, associations, a whole range of different things, and sometimes it causes confusion in the understanding on how these function. And a lot of them, we speak about treasurers, other ones directors, other ones CEOs, other ones CFOs. It starts getting confusing. All these words start getting thrown around. What do they mean? What do they do? What's the difference between them? So we need to start drawing analogies so that people have that basic understanding. Cooperative, very similar to a company. Yes, there are material differences, but that comes into the fundamentals behind what one does. A company is for profit. Cooperatives is for benefit of its members. Now, you'd assume, right, that a company is also for the benefit of its shareholders, but cooperatives deal more with socioeconomic issues. So they take certain communities or people in communities and they involve them in projects. So it's not just about making money and profit and trying to put money in people's pockets as one would typically with a company, but it's more about providing something more than just a profit. So for example, food, where you have cooperatives where there's 50 members and they run certain organic food programs, and it involves education, involves a usage of certain areas, and they grow their own vegetables or they farm certain animals in sustainable ways, and they're all involved and they all have a basic ownership over the process. But at the end of the day, what do they take home? They take home food. They take home sometimes money from the sale of these things to farms, that sort of thing. So you do have housing cooperatives as well, especially when it comes to the affordable housing space, where there's common land that's owned, and sometimes developers get involved in this, and part of the project is to create these cooperatives to assist the local communities. So you find this especially when it comes to tribal lands and things like that, where you try to create these cooperatives, but there's no limitation. So now, so this is my understanding of the question. We have a cooperative that owns this land. So my first assumption is that it's a legally incorporated cooperative, and that there's a bunch of members, 47 members. Now, in cooperatives, typically your members, analogy, shareholders. So there's a lot of input that the members give towards the cooperative. That being said, sometimes it is very difficult, especially with larger cooperatives, where every time somebody needs to make a decision, you have to call 200 people into a room, 300 people into the room. It becomes impossible to manage. So what do? We create leaders, we appoint leaders. So an analogy to companies, cooperatives have things like directors that make certain operational day-to-day decisions. They've got treasurers, so very similar to CEOs. They've got chairpersons that run meetings. They might even have one single central person that makes certain fundamental decisions, right? So now we've got these members that benefit, and we've got a management committee like this person mentions. Now, let's get into the property side of things. Forget that this is a cooperative, because I think that might actually just complicate the issue somewhat. So there's a certain person or legal entity that owns property. Now, servitudes are basically a certain right of usage or a certain limitation that a person places on that specific property. Why? Many reasons. There's servitudes for right of ways, where the only way to get to plot A is through plot B. So plot B will have to have a servitude registered over it in order to force that right of way. And even though plot B is owned by a specific individual, sometimes it's set in stone that that plot has to have a servitude. When does this happen? When people own large pieces of land, they subdivided, and they decided, well, I want 3 pieces. There's no access to a road except from here. So when we divide, we're going to set this condition, and no one's going to be able to remove that condition as long as it's useful, as long as it's needed, required, right? So that's typically how servitudes work. There's plenty of servitudes. Government may insist, guys that used to own the property may insert the servitudes in order to make the subdivision feasible, whatever the case is. So here they're being offered, they're basically being there's a request that they give a servitude over their own piece of land to somebody else, to a neighbor. There's no specification why, but in exchange, instead of being paid a price for it or some sort of rental or whatever you want to call it, they're instead being offered more land. So all of this matters because that's where we need more information. So are they being offered ownership over more land? So now they own 1.5 thousand square meters. Are they being given whatever X amount of square meters, which they will own and be able to do with as they please in exchange for use of servitude? Also, another very important question is, what is the servitude for? Because remember, if it's just a right of way, maybe it's not inconvenient, but there's certain things that you wouldn't necessarily want people to be able to do on your own piece of land. So it's very important to specify what is the servitude that you're being offered, and is its value the same or similar to what's being given to you? Because at the end of the day, it's a transaction. So it's quid pro quo. I'm giving you this in exchange for this. So I don't care. I'll take the servitude over my land. Doesn't bother me. I'm getting this in exchange, which is valued at X, and I can do Y with it, right? So the due diligence component, right? Because now it comes to the decision. Does the cooperative have to take it? No. Cooperative legal entity has to sign one signature to say yay or nay. But how do you get to that one decision? As a collective, you obviously need to now look at the constitution, analogy, memorandum of incorporation, same thing with a company. There's rules there on how decisions are going to be made. A lot of rules are made by the members, especially very important rules, because the members, all of them collectively need to make certain decisions. So is this a operational question, or is it a material decision by the members? If this is the only property that's actually owned by the cooperative, I dare say it's rather material, especially considering we're speaking about 672 square meters, so it's a substantial portion of it. So my gut is telling me that this is going to be a member decision, but I might be wrong. But only the documents would tell. So yes, you would need to be able, you would need to have this conversation between the members of the cooperative in order to make the decision on whether they're willing to take up, basically to provide the servitude and take over the property or not. And then, yes, obviously, so it would come down to a vote. So this is now a question: does anyone want to oppose? Absolutely. You'd have the opportunity, because they'd have to call the meeting in order to make this decision. And by virtue of that, there would be an opportunity for there to be opposition. And then insofar as registration is concerned, I think I answered that initially. There would be a requirement for a registration of a servitude against the title deed. It's really the only way to enforce the servitude. If it's not registered, then it's not, it won't work over the property. So, and it's a real right. So if this cooperative ever sells the property in its entirety, the servitude will remain. So it's also another consideration is, if there's ever an intention to sell this property, what do you do? You'd have to bear in mind that now it's subject to the servitude, which may impact its value. I think I hope that kind of covered everything.
Yep.